Hmm. You know that Sonic Racing Crossworlds game? The one on the screen currently? Well, it has been somewhat of a hyperfixation of mine. Since it came out, there seems to be actually quite a bit of depth to the game that I've been really enjoying personally. There are different modifiers for your stats, there's different gadgets you can use, there's a number of things. Well, I've been hyperfixating on this game for a good while. I wanted to see if I could make a little video here and break down some data that I had collected. So, I wanted to first explain the stats, the gadgets, and a little bit about what we're doing before we kick it off here. Truly. Gadgets can be changes through stats, flat values, usually, at least for the time being, flat values. We will see if there's any more gadgets that come out down the line, because I know some have came out with, or one has come out with the Hatsune Miku event, one just came out for the Joker event. Yeah, things like that. So, for example, one of the gadgets is you can get speed boost depending on the amount of tricks that you do, but you can only do up to 3 max, and that doesn't really change anything after the fact. But because you have this one gadget that lets you perform tricks faster, you can do tricks off of small jumps and launches. It makes it a lot easier. You can use this trick gadget to allow for a multitude of things. Another example, or another thing about this, is rings are used for top speed caps in the game, similar to coins in Mario Kart. You can have a gadget to pick up more rings in a space around you, or get them from tricks and bumping into other characters. As you can see, there are a lot of options available to mix and match, including your car, gadgets, and your characters. And that brings us to the subject of today's video. Is there a best build to use in this game? Well, let's think about it a second. Considering the many factors between the car, the character you use, the gadgets, there has to be a setup hands down, right? Well, I decided to grab some builds the top players were using at the time, with a little bit of my own adjustments, to test how well I would do based on each selection. I changed up the car according to the gadget setup and tracked what was the balancing of each stat as I went along. I also recorded every single race that I participated in, up to 20 for each loadout. I wasn't going to go with 10, but I asked a few friends and they said a larger sample size would probably lead to better results, and I'm going to have to agree with them. Each of the stats one by one here. There is speed, acceleration, handling, power, and boost. That's 5. Now, the last 2 I am still a little bit iffy on the understanding of, but with that in mind, let's shoot anyway. Speed is relatively simple. Higher the speed stat, the higher your top speed. Then there's acceleration, meaning from stopping or getting hit by items, how long does it take to reach max speed? Next, we have changes on how tight of corners you can take, if at all. That's with handling. Or you can snake on the track easier than if you had a lower handling stat, for example. Getting towards the bottom, we have the power stat. This one I still am sort of confused about, but the general idea is that you recover faster from getting hit by items and determines how many rings you lose per hit. Lastly, we have the boost stat, which impacts how quickly you build your boost gauge while doing drifts around the track. I initially thought the boost stat meant that your boosts were greater, but apparently it has to do with your gauge, and it has to do with how quickly your gauge fills, which I did not know that until I did some more research. So, as you can see, in my spreadsheet, I did track what loadout I was using, the placement within each loadout, the map, the average ranks, and the average rings of each match. I also added in some notes to each race in case there was some major BS that happened at the time, which did happen a lot when it comes to power items at the end, which you will come to find out. I don't have a defensive item, I don't like this. Yeah, there we go. But we aren't going to go through every individual race necessarily. Rather, look at some of the cumulative data that I obtained through this process. I bet you're curious about what each loadout is that I settled on for the 4 that I used. Well, they all ended up being different types of loadouts. I did have a favorite going into it that I like to use often when I'm playing casually, but I had another one that grew on me, as you'll come to find out. For the first loadout, I used a speed car setup with gadgets, ring gain boost, air trick expert, and air trick bounty, and the speed tuner too. The air trick adept allows you to do air tricks more quickly, allowing for tricks to be performed even on the smallest of jumps. The air trick bounty coincides with the air trick adept to grant 2 rings per each trick performed. The ring gain boost gives you a slight boost every time you pick up a ring, including when you obtain them during tricks. So the main idea of this first loadout is to get to the maximum amount of rings as possible and to gain boosts for even more as I go along the track. The downside to using a setup like this is if you get hit by one item, you lose over half your rings and have to work back up to 100 again. There are gadgets that allow the collection of more than 100 rings, but they don't increase the speed cap or anything. It just gives you more insurance if you get nailed by a stray item. Now, the reason I prefer this loadout over most others is because it feels like my car is able to consistently keep up with most of the pack without falling behind too often. Of course, this varied from map to map, and don't even get me started with Blizzard Valley, but for the most part, I stayed hovering around the 1st to 6th place area with this loadout, especially till the final stretch where everyone busts out their items to the extreme, including myself. Onto the second loadout that I settled on. This was an extreme gear, i.e. the hoverboards, setup that I use typically for time trials, and I wanted to see if this loadout held on to any water in a racetrack full of players. And as you can see on the screen in front of you, I'm currently using that loadout. It's not a very complicated one, but we'll get to it. So, the stats will be up on the screen for all to gander at, and the gadgets are as follows. We got ring game boost, level 3 quick charge, level 2 quick charge, and the perfect charge bounty. Let's break each of these down. The ring gain boost is the same from loadout 1, so I won't re-explain as to not be redundant. The level 3 and level 2 quick charges are for charging your specific levels of boost gauge, levels 3 and 2 respectively. And finally, the perfect charge bounty, which gives you 3 rings for a perfect level 1 charge release, 6 rings for a level 2 release, and 9 rings for a level 3 release. The release part is basically as soon as you hit the gauge and you get it up to as high as possible, you release and it gives you rings. So the idea behind this build is typically time trials, as I mentioned before, and getting a slight boost to speed for each set of rings collected from the perfect charge bounty. This loadout also made it easier to hit 100 rings over the course of the race, alongside snaking on straightaways. Moving forward into the third loadout, this was another speed car setup with 2 very simple gadgets. The first being quick recovery, the second being one of the most popular gadgets, the drift charge kit, and that is about it. Now, the only reason there is 2 gadgets is because of something I hadn't explained in the previous 2. So for those of you who haven't played this game or are not very well aware of it, there is only a certain number of gadgets that you can use, which is 6. And some gadgets are worth more, some gadgets are worth less slots. There is no 6 in total. There is 6 in total, but you can only have up to a maximum of 3 taken up in each slot. So in between there, you can have 1s, 2s, and 3s because of that. Now I want to cover what each gadget does. The quick recovery gadget is pretty self-explanatory, but I will cover it anyway for those of you in the back who don't know. The quick recovery is basically just that, a quick recovery for items that hit you. Now, I don't exactly know the numbers for how it impacts your speed and acceleration, because it feels like when I get hit, even in a speed car with low acceleration, that I can just pick up the pieces and get going right away. Versus if I didn't have quick recovery, then it kind of sags me all the way to the back of the pack. Now onto the other gadget that I use. This one is the most popular that I've seen between all the top players, and this is the drift charge kit. Now, the reason why this is the most popular is up for question, but I have a general idea of what might be the reason. I would say it's because it adds a little boost to handling alongside giving you faster drift gauge fill in general. and that means for all 3 levels and 4 if you're using a 4th. The combination of these 2 gadgets is meant to allow you to keep up with the pack or to front run yourself, even if you get hit by an item. Because, like I said before, and I don't know those numbers for the acceleration and speed necessarily, it feels like you can keep up even if you get nailed and a few people get past you, or if you're really far ahead and you get hit by the ghost, which is the blue shell in this game, it still feels like you can keep your lead pretty well. And the drift gauge filler for the drift charge kit, that is also very helpful because it gives you a little boost to handling, like I said, and that handling lets you take tighter corners or even just maneuver your car slightly better. It helps overall. Let's move on to the last loadout that I wanted to use for the sake of this video. It is actually my go-to loadout for most races when I'm not using my speed car setup. It is a fully decked out handling car that uses 3 gadgets. The drift charge kit again, the level 3 quick charge, and the ultimate charge. I already described the drift charge kit, so we can move past that. The level 3 quick charge as well as from before, but the ultimate charge is a little more interesting. What this gadget does is allow for the ability to reach a 4th drift gauge that is rainbow, and alongside that, once you pop said gauge, you become invincible for a small amount of time. Now, it's not as long as the shield item itself, but it acts like a shield, where nothing can hit you, nothing can damage you, you won't lose any rings if you bump into the guardrails. It's just like a good buff overall, if you're capable of hitting the 4 charges. The reason this is my go-to for most races is because of the handling part of the build. It just feels really good to use, and it doesn't feel like super clunky either. Like, it feels like I can still keep up with the pack pretty well. I might fall behind sometimes because of the low speed and acceleration, but for the most part, it does me a pretty good job. I don't have many complaints. And including that little invincible part of the boost, that lets me repel like any items. Like if I'm super far up ahead, I can snake along a straightaway and dodge an item, or just let it hit me and I'll be fine. It's super useful. So I highly recommend looking at some of the top players' builds because of that. They use Amy, but I use Metal Sonic because of preferences. So with all of these explained out of the way, it is now time to actually look at my spreadsheet I made and how it works. With the first column, we have the loadout numbers. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's just a drop-down box saying, hey, I use this loadout this round at this time. The second column, which is column B, that covers my placement. Now, I did have numbers originally, but that kind of fucked up my graphs a little bit. So I added numbers with their respective endings, like first with ST, second with ND, and so on. So then the graphs come out a little cleaner. But the next 2 categories that I have are a little funky because I kind of had to come up with them on the spot, and I wanted to have some kind of metric. I have the player rating, which I take an average of all 12 players, including myself in the lobby, and I get the average rating for said lobby. And then average rings is a little more complicated because I took the amount of rings that I had going into a Crossworld, and then I took the amount of rings I had at the end of the race. I was thinking of doing beginning, middle, end, but you always start with like 3 rings, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I feel on the average, it'll probably bust out to around the same number each time because I don't use any of the gadgets that give you rings on starting boost. I could, but I just don't prefer them. Anyways, and the final 2 columns that I have are one for notes, and the second one is for my map. Now, I kept track of the maps because I wanted to see if there was any correlation between a map that I deemed as better for myself and my placement. Now, what I did come to find out through this entire process is that the rating seems to be making a big issue or make a big difference, and the items and how the end of the game goes with my placement. With that in mind, let's actually dive into the data part. When it comes to first place finishes, I have loadout 1 and 2 tied for 5.3% of the 20 races for each loadout. That is about 1 or 2 first place finishes in each loadout. So out of the 20, that's pretty good. I was sort of surprised by this one because I generally prefer handling loadouts and speed loadouts, and I actually ended up doing a little well with a boost loadout, which is the hoverboard, of course. I did also come to find out that the Loadout 4, I had the most 12th place finishes with. Loadout 4 is the handling loadout. That is my favorite that I said, but it doesn't seem to really show the numbers that it's my favorite, because I feel like if it's a favorite loadout, that means you're really good with it. You should be able to place well no matter what, and you're pretty familiar with what to do with it. I'm still kind of new to the game. I know I'm in Legend, but I am just below 2,000 about right now. So it's still like an improvement that I got to make while I'm playing. I'm not taking it too seriously. I'm just kind of having fun with it, because this is kind of like an arcade game after all. It feels like an arcade game from Craig's Cruisers or Dave & Buster's. Anyways, when I'm covering all placements across all 80 races that I did though, I only placed in first 3.8% of the time. So out of the 80, that's about 4 races that I got first place. That's not that great. I can attest to my own skills that while I was going up through the ranks, I was getting first place a lot. I was getting second place and third place a lot. But when I was doing this test in my higher rank of Legend, I was struggling a bit more. I feel like that's still a pretty decent improvement for myself. Out of 80 races, I got first place 4 times, but I feel like I could definitely do a little better. Maybe I'm just coping, but we'll see. We'll find out. But a lot of my races, I tend to hang out in between the 3rd to 6th place area, which wasn't that bad in all seriousness. It's pretty consistent across all loadouts, I want to say, but it still shows that on the complete set of data that I have on one of my pie charts that I placed 6th place 16.7% of the time. So I was definitely in that area for a good while. Moving on, I got most of my wins, my first place wins, with an average rating between 2,000 and 3,000 of the player's skill. There were some outliers that I found where they were in the 9,000s, they were in the 7,000s, or I had people on the other side of the spectrum where it was in the 60s to 70s or maybe 1,000. And I think some of those people got hauled into our lobbies by their friends. So feel bad for them, but that is what it is. Some of them didn't do too bad. I'm not gonna lie to you. But the other thing to note too with those races that I did win is I was using my items more aggressively. I wasn't holding on to them as long, because if I got a good item, I like to hold on to it so I could try to work my way up to the front. But I was only really able to work my way up to the front when I was driving with the speed builds instead of my handling build. If I started off in the front with my handling build, I could stay up there for quite a while, but if I get hit by one item, that was always a problem. The other thing that did surprise me in terms of my data is I'm not a very avid hoverboard user. I don't really like the extreme gear all that much. Like, it looks super cool. I like the way it looks, but it's not my most comfortable loadout. So the fact that I did get a win at all with that loadout was really surprising to me. Sure, it was only 1 first place, and I got a majority of my second place and third places on this loadout. Since it's the loadout that I typically use for time trials and I see other people use for time trials, minus like the character, I didn't think I did too bad of a job. Despite the results speaking a different story, I think I still prefer Loadout 4 overall. The way it feels to play is what matters more to me than anything else. Like, sure, I might not be getting first every single time. I'm not playing the most meta build, I guess, because the top player is currently an Amy using all hot hatch on the handling car, and I don't like to use Amy. Like, I'm gonna keep it real. I don't like to use Amy. I much prefer Metal Sonic. Metal Sonic's my favorite. That's where I have most of my mods. When I play Outcome Memories, I also like to play Metal Sonic. Kind of another hyperfixation, I suppose. But I think I'm just gonna probably follow my own song with this one. So that's not to bait and switch the video, though. I guess it could be kind of a bait and switch, because I'm saying at the beginning, what is the best loadout? What is the best thing that all the players are using that are topping the charts like crazy? Well, I used some of them and I didn't really like them. and I performed worse because of that. So I think at the end of this, the big difference that you want to draw from what I found out is play how you want to play. You can look into the meta, you can look and find out and see like what's really good. Because I really like quick recovery. That's super nice. I don't see a lot of players running it though. But in some of these levels where like you're scrapping with people a bit more and you're using more items, quick recovery is super nice. So if you find yourself in a lobby where people are nailing you with items constantly, put on a quick recovery for a little while. Maybe sometimes you want to just max out your fucking speed stat. You wanted to get it all the way to 100 like I do sometimes. You could put on one of the other kits for speed, and then you could put on the drift handling kit if you really want to. The only thing that I would say is consistent across all my builds that I have tried so far is the drift handling kit. That one is my favorite, and that seems to be a favorite of a lot of people. It just feels really good to use. I wanted to end this out with saying that you can play what you want to play. There are going to be really good loadouts. There are going to be really bad loadouts. Might be something in between. But the way you want to play matters more than anything else, because this is still almost like a party game. It's almost like an arcade game. It's not necessarily super competitive, at least not yet. And I'm having a really good time with it. And I really hope I continue to have a good time with it. And I want to see if other people want to have that same experience if they listen to what I have to say. Because it's not about what's the best and what's the worst. It's about you. So I wanted to end this off then. Thank you everyone who dropped by, new faces and old. Thank you for coming and watching my first ever video, aside from a React video I did a while ago. And I wanted to get my feet wet on kind of YouTube essay type videos because they're my favorite personally. It's something you can put on and listen to while you are doing anything, work, school, sleeping. I've been told I have a pleasant voice for that. But thank you to everyone who dropped by. And it means the most that you came and watched all the way to the end. So have a good day, everyone. This is Dovacor signing off.